made some decisions that wasn't something he ever wanted to do again. But the only thing that he really knew how to do was to draw. And he was coming into the library and using the library collections and things like that, and got the idea to do a wall like he had seen in Chicago and in Detroit, the Wall of Respect. And this was a wall that was generated by the artists in the community in protest of the war and other kinds of social problems that were going on. And Purvis didn't paint directly on the wall, but there was a place they called Good Bread Alley in the Overtown area. And the buildings were being abandoned, and Purvis began to make his paintings and to put his paintings up on the wall and hang them very much like Gary has hung us here. They were just stacked one on top of the other. They were side by side. It was just covered. And you could see that wall if you were on I-95, which was just being built, but you could look down and you could see it, and people began to notice Purvis's work. And one of the people that noticed Purvis's work was a gentleman named Bernard Davis. And that's probably a name that not many people know. But Bernard ran something he called the Miami Museum of Modern Art. He was a very wealthy man. We've tried to do some research on his history, and it's a little bit complicated. He was from Ukraine, moved to Philadelphia at some point, and was in the textile business, and did very well, and began to collect art. He was also the philatelist to the Vatican, which I think is just a very cool title to have. I would like to have a business card that says something like that. But then he also was
a little louder.
I'm sorry. I don't have Tamara in the back doing this to me. But he was also a patron of Gorky, the painter Gorky. And sometimes I've been traveling different places, New York, or I think even in Paris one time we were at the Beaubourg and saw a painting from Gorky that was from courtesy of or donated by Mr. Davis. But anyway, Davis saw his work and offered him the first show in the gallery and brought his work into the gallery. And one of the people that came to the shows was Margarita Cano, and she was an art librarian at that time at the main library downtown. And she recognized this man, Purvis, as one of the people that came into the main library all the time and would pull off the oversized books and look at them and spend hours and hours going through those oversized books. She began to talk to him, and she had also, another thing she had done was to initiate the Artmobile service, or initiate the Artmobile program. And the Artmobile was a van. It was purchased by Southeast Banking Corporation, who was a very generous corporate donor at that time, and given to the library, and the library was to run it. And I was hired to be the first Artmobile librarian. So that was in '76, and I met Purvis shortly after that. And he was bringing paintings in, but maybe a year or so later, he started bringing in these books. And an art librarian, what are you going to do? But they were incredible. He would take old discarded books, ledgers, and different things like that he would find. I don't think he used library books. People have because he was so involved with the library, have thought that, but I really don't think he did. So, but anyway, he would take these ledgers and he would paste paintings in them or drawings in them. And so every single page would have another page pasted on both sides. And so the books began to fan out. And incredible sculptural pieces. They just are so wonderful and so magical. Every book had a title. I have one that was called Every Day I See a Truck. There were certain themes that he really liked. If you look around the walls here, he loved trucks. He loved sort of portraits and angels, people with halos. You can see some devils. You can see the establishment, these big blue eyes kind of lurking over the people and over the city. People reaching for jobs. Horses, lots of horses. Pregnant women, a lot of pregnant women.
Horses.
And horses. The horses are interesting because he painted an auditorium walls at the old library in downtown Miami. This was in Biscayne Park, or Bayfront Park. But he painted the auditorium and painted those walls, and when we left that building, it was torn down, and we felt really bad about that. So we were able to get a grant from the city of Miami, and he painted the exterior of the Comber Overtown Library. And they had a big dedication for that. And Margarita Cano and I thought it would be so terrific, because Purvis liked those horses, to have the mounted police come. And so there was a band, there was a lot of speeches, there were a lot of VIP people. He didn't like horses with police on. So, another person that came to that, I'm jumping around a little bit, and I'm sorry, but that's what I do.
That's okay.
Another person that was very important in his life, besides Bernard Davis and stuff, there were several people that he talked about. Mr. Dreyfus, Richard Levin, Ruth and Richard Shack were big collectors then, were very supportive of Purvis. But he had support in the neighborhood, and there was a gentleman named Celo Crispo, who was a Santeria priest, and Purvis lived with him for several years, and Celo always kind of looked out for him. Some of the people that were coming by to buy Purvis's work didn't like Celo very much because he was trying to make sure that Purvis wasn't getting ripped off. And Purvis was pretty easy to rip off, because he really, I would try to talk to him about money, and he would say, easy come, easy go. So I've never had teenagers, but I imagine these are conversations that people have with teenagers. It's just, but he was an easy mark for some shady people, yeah. He would talk about having a movie made of his life, and they did do a documentary. It's about an hour. But if they made a movie of his life and they started casting villains, it would be a big call for but now I'm bouncing again. We talked about subject. We talked about, let's see what we didn't talk about.
I can say one of the things that I can remember from my earliest days of learning about Purvis was when Dan and I first moved here, and we lived on the beach, and it was one of the many renovations of like the Roni, which is now the one.
This is the time, right?
No, not the Satai. No, the Roni on 23rd, which is now one. But there was, the at that time plywood boards. Yeah. Because you had to hide structures. Now it's now it's like advertising for the structure, but back then it was just like wood, plywood that they would nail up. And Purvis painted the entire thing. We're just like, I said to Dan, I was like, we should go steal that. But we didn't. We ended up buying works from him. But that was our first introduction. Like he really painted everywhere.
Everything. That was something that was true of him. And Tamara, who's not here, talked about traveling with Purvis. And I guess they went somewhere, it was an overnight, and they had to stay in a motel. And the next morning, they got up, and Purvis had painted the curtains and the bedspread and everything. And
Oh my God.
we had, at the library, we had gotten a grant for him to paint some canvases for us. And we set up downstairs, and we're, I guess, 7 feet by 7 feet or something like that. We set up downstairs in the basement where the maintenance guys were. And Purvis would come in every day, very dependable guy, very sweet man, but extremely dependable and very conscientious about his time and stuff. But he would come in and he would paint the canvases, but then we started noticing he was painting the buckets. And I had an old plastic vitrine that had broken, and that was all painted. It was just all, he never stopped. At openings, when he would go to openings, he would sort of sit in a corner and he would draw. And he was a big guy. A little bit about what Mr. Davis told him, because he was an artist, he could wear whatever he wanted to. And his normal everyday outfit was a shirt with the sleeves torn out, and pants with the cut off at the knees and stuff. But when he would get dressed up, he'd put a little beret on. Be ready for the opening. But a very sweet man, very gentle, very dependable, all the good stuff. Oh, the frames that are interesting to me, because my husband and I took him up to Fort Lauderdale. They had an exhibition, a group show of Florida eccentrics. I think this was about 1987. And we drove Purvis and Celo's little boy, who was Pepito, who was about 5 years old, I guess, at the time. We drove them up there. It was a crowded exhibition, lots and lots of people. Purvis wanted to go upstairs. He wanted to look at the permanent collection. He wanted to look at old pieces. He wanted to look at frames. And it seems like it was shortly after that he really got into a lot of the framing that he did on the work. But he was always gathering information, and he spent a lot of time at the library, the main library, as well as the Comer Overtown Library, looking at art books, looking at National Geographic. He was sort of educated by the public library and by public radio, radio and public television and the History Channel. So he had sort of funny little bits of information that he would put together, but he had definite artists that he was interested in. Van Gogh, he told me one time Van Gogh gave us yellow. I thought, wow, that's pretty profound.
Well, speaking of the yellow, right?
Yeah.
From what I understand, because I feel like the best way to understand, we're talking about Purvis Young, is exactly what we're doing, is the banter. And please jump in, Gary, because every time you come across somebody who owns a Purvis Young or somebody,
They have a story.
they have a story, and it really enriches the whole experience. And I know from a conversation I had with somebody, that yellow comes from the firemen in Miami-Dade, right? They painted the fire what do you call it? Fire hydrant. So when I moved to Miami to Key Biscayne, I remember it was 1975, and so fire hydrants are a big deal for us because 76 everyone had to paint them. It was a bicentennial, and we were all painting those yellow fire hydrants bicentennial, right? So then I guess they had to paint them all back. So they would drop off what was left of that distinctive yellow paint at Purvis's studio. And that's the thing too. He painted with house paint. He painted with industrial paints. It was so when we have, for example, Booker T. Washington High School in the other day, we had their advanced placement art classes. This was a conversation we had with the teacher that he wanted everyone to know. If you are one of the fortunate, I think it's 2% of society that drives you to the arts, you can't deny that. You have to feed that. And as much as Purvis Young, as a young kid who was probably running around with his friends, I mean, he came from, his origins were from the Bahamas, right? And he had artists in his family, and probably an uncle or somebody I know was pushing him towards the arts. He got in trouble, and unfortunately in the Times, somebody from Overtown got sent to a pretty serious situation, and thank goodness he survived it, right? As a young man, 14, 15 years old. Imagine, 40 years later he comes back, and his hometown has changed incredibly. In addition, JFK was assassinated, the civil rights were underway, and his home and his neighbor's house were in shambles. They were building I-95 right over, and that's why we call it Overtown, right through. And history says there were plans, they could have gone east, west, different directions. They went right through Overtown. And with all of this, it started, I believe, and this is what people say, that inspiration, that desire to tell a story, and I have something to say, came right through his hands, and he is picking up. I mean, it gets me choked up. He's picking up everything he loves. His neighbor's frames, his doors, everything, and started painting on them. So I'm changing what I see in front of me. And what he was really inspired to do as well is he heard about these muralists, and these muralists were, they had a lot to say. And if you think about Roberta Mazza in Chile, this kind of work, putting together, painting murals, would have you thrown in prison. And this kind of the work, I can tell you, fascists hate. This is the kind of work they burn. And so what he was doing was he got in touch with that, and he said, maybe I don't have, a 20-foot canvas and a sponsor to pay for my paints and supplies, but he started picking up, the frames and the pieces of plywood, and he started, like you said, with the Good Bread Alley, I'm gonna do my mural in pieces. And that was all along this alley. And it drove city officials crazy, from what I understand, because for a couple things. One, he's telling a story that city officials didn't want people to know, which was what was happening in Overtown and what was happening to Black people, because he's depicting their life on a daily basis. You take one of my paintings, I'm going to put another one up. And many times, from what I understand, what really haunted him was, and if you all follow the Miami Herald or the Miami News, no surprise, the city officials would come in, take down his work, and they said, we're putting it in storage. And it would drive him crazy. Where are my paintings? Did you either sell them or did you throw them out? And it really tortured this genuine human being, tortured him with things like that. And a friend of mine, Jackie Collier, who runs the Hampton House, was here the other day, and she said exactly what you said. For him, it wasn't about money. He felt very fortunate that he had enough money to live, to buy what he needed, and he loved to nurture and care for, especially pregnant women. He would take care of them. He would give them money, pay for bills, and for him, that filled him with joy. And the fact that people like you facilitated that, it's really incredible. And sometimes I start my conversation like this. You know the difference between Purvis Young and Jackson Pollock? Well, Jackson Pollock had Lee Krasner. That's about it. Lee Krasner sold the world on Pollock, and his paintings are multi-million-dollar, that abstract expression and early performance art, etc. But I'll tell you, Purvis Young, and we are so fortunate right now to be surrounded by this energy. He had a lot going on. I mean, if you think about it, he is painting, and people say he was painting sometimes with a stream of light, and he loved to have his paintings around him. It was like, these are my works, these are my collections, people I know and love will come in and purchase my work. And in the end, I believe he was about to be evicted, and the rebels came in, right? And purchased, he said, buy everything. And they made a deal with him, but I believe it was like monthly installments.
So Tamara was instrumental in that.
Yeah.
She put the rebels together. They were at a Christmas party at a house, and the family had a Purvis hanging in the dining room, and Mira saw the painting and said, who is that? And Tamara came in, that's Purvis Young, so she made the introduction. And then when the rebels went to the museum, went to his studio, she writes this in the foreword to the book that we have over there. She said she couldn't stop at just one, because obviously it's a story. So that's when they ended up sort of purchasing the entire contents of this warehouse. This was 1999.
And then
Right.
Yeah, and then the first thing they had to do was fumigate because of termites and all. He didn't keep things well. But yeah, as Jackie was saying, I mean, he really felt it was his sort of duty, mission to catalog, to document the life that was in front of him. So he was almost a journalist. His initial
Ride his
drawings,
bicycle through the streets and everything.
he would title and date everything. So it's like, dead man on the street this morning, and it was all sort of documented. So he really, his work was about a recording of life in front of him, and it was a protest as well. That this life wasn't so great, it wasn't so easy, and he felt this is the least he could do was to sort of get it down. And what's, as Jackie mentioned, which was so great, not only are you getting a journal of time, but you're also getting the actual material. This was all like demolished buildings that were happening around him that he would find material. So it's sort of layered in an interesting way. And then just sort of cut, I don't know, it's my own thing, but the halftime show at the Super Bowl this year, the Kendrick Lamar, I don't know if anyone saw it, but I almost can draw a direct line from Purvis to that show. That just basically black in America is hard. And this is sort of, it hasn't changed. Purvis started in the late 60s, and Kendrick Lamar is now, 60 years later, 80, and it's still the same story. So I think there's, so this is what the work's about.
But it's very often like, and Purvis's story is very often an artist's story as well, right? So he was an artist through and through.
Yeah.
Like he literally painted on everything with anything that people gave him.
And masterfully. I mean, that's
exactly.
And
Then other than like those of us that were, really loved his work, right? There were many, as you said, the cast of characters, had they shown the villains would have been many. And many people stole from Purvis and sold his paintings for tens of thousands of dollars and gave him a couple $100 because that's all he wanted or cared about.
And get $500 and fill the van.
Yeah, and so it really wasn't until like for many artists after his death. I mean, the rebels bought his work when he was still alive, thankfully, and then they took the works and they donated works to museums around the world, and that's really when kind of the art world perked up and said, wow, who is this artist? But, you know, Purvis died not that long after from diabetes.
Well,
So,
he also got involved with a gentleman who had him declared incompetent. When he
Oh,
was
I
trying to
forgot
get away
about
from it.
that.
I was gonna ask about
Yes.
the guardianship that.
I forgot about
most
that,
people don't know.
And
Yeah.
I think those
And
are
that
the
was 3
things
years
that
of torture.
tortured him.
I
That-
actually was asked to be on the case and I declined.
Oh, wow. Yeah. One of the most beautiful things I heard that you would say was, and he's a poet too, he'd say, I want to paint the sky like honey and just let it drip down and sweeten the world. And, you know, to be connected, but it says so much about you as well, that you
Well-
could connect with a spirit like that. And I always, when I talk to people about him, I always mention the public library is so very important. And
It is
and
so
we-
important.
Yeah, we
It's
bring
public
the
radio
books
and public
here.
television. And right now,
Exactly.
you know,
Because he
Not
took
sleeping at night.
an inclination, you know, that he might have inherited, but he might have shut down. And then when he was exposed to what he was seeking, it just caught on fire. And he said, angels, I mean, when you look at the Raphael, Titian, Michelangelo, he said, angels, I have angels around me. I have good people around me. And he painted his people with halos. Sometimes young students, again, will come in and they haven't been exposed to this type of abstract expressionism, or actually what they say he invented with abstract urbanism. But I'll tell you what, you can identify his work a mile away. So many times, you know, you're going to a museum and I'm like, I think that's, and you get closer. There, you can tell Purvis Young a mile away. And so much is because he painted so much that his people, the dancing people, his happy people, his praying people, he could do with one stroke, like this. And no one can copy that. That is so distinctive. And you can see it throughout the show. His dancing people, and some will say, like the Rubels, that this tends to be, you know, hands up, something he saw a lot in his neighborhood, as well as praying.
they're
And you
reaching
can see
for
that.
jobs, or they're
Mhm,
playing.
reaching.
Yeah, he did a book called I Play Ball or something like that. So it's filled with drawings of people playing ball and playing games. So there were some happy
Basketball
things.
piece up there,
Yeah.
just right at the doorway.
And singing.
There's some handouts over in the corner there, and this one here is an interview with Purvis, and it was in a book called Souls Grown Deep. So if you wanted to, you know, read Purvis's words, pick up this handout. It's
And there's
very
a
good.
catalog here. I'm fascinated by this chapter because it's all about his bugs, which is awesome for the nature center. So I love the way he painted bugs, insects. Yeah.
This is a great book.
Uh-huh. It
It's
kind of
got
divides
filled
it
with-
up in his
Yeah, fills it
subjects,
up with
right?
Subjects and stuff like that. So people in jail, pregnant women,
Yeah.
Pregnant ones, yeah.
so protesters. But and the Rebels did this, and so this has been another way that they've gotten Purvis's story out and his work out.
So if we have time, I always say, stand up, walk around, get close, get far, you know, grab a book, sit on the floor, and then we're moving on to more wine.
We're gonna gather outside for a moment after, you know, you wanna walk around the room for just a little something. And then we will go on our walk. And then, if you wanna keep hanging out with us, Catherine, myself, I know a lot of people here are gonna be heading over to the Cleats. That's the